I was leaving my sister's room when I saw him standing in the hallway a few feet away. He was very tall, thin, wearing an old dress and a badly placed wig, his face too white, his lips painted red. He stared at me, surprised, without blinking, although I realized too late that he couldn't blink. He didn't have eyelids. Hello, my name is Camila, and today I want to tell you something I experienced, something we experienced when I was a child, something that happened to my whole family, but that I experienced in a way that still makes me nervous. I honestly believe I'll never stop being afraid of the dark, an uncontrollable fear of the dark. I was born in Cadereyta, but I grew up in Monterrey. When I was 9 years old, my parents bought a new house. Well, new for us, because it was actually a foreclosed home. You say the bank forecloses because people can't keep up with the payments and then sells the properties much cheaper, even though they're still in litigation. For my parents, it was a much bigger opportunity than the apartment we were living in, where we'd outgrown it, and it was in a quieter neighborhood. It was a house we could never have afforded at a normal price. The day we moved in, when we started bringing our things, the neighbors were friendly, but they said strange things. An older woman with white hair and huge glasses brought us food, and while my mom was thanking her, she whispered, "I hope the owners don't come back. They weren't good people." She didn't elaborate, and it was the same with several neighbors. Everyone seemed relieved that another family was living there. At first, everything was normal and as strange as moving into a house that still smells foreign, that still has the smell of the previous family, can be. Not a bad or unpleasant smell, but it didn't smell like us. I always had a strange feeling. I didn't want to tell my parents. I didn't know how to explain it well, and I didn't want them to feel like I was seeing something negative in the house they had just bought with so much effort. Besides, I suppose the fact that my parents gradually told us that previous dreams don't go away peacefully fueled my feeling that the house was somehow rejecting us. The bank evicted him. They threw all his things out onto the street, furniture, clothes, even family photos, and the whole block saw it. My dad said it wasn't our fault, that the purchase was completely legal. But sometimes I saw him just staring silently at the door, as if he expected someone to knock at any moment, reclaiming what was his. The first time something strange happened was one night during our first week there. I was already in bed when I heard footsteps inside the house. Not in the street, not in the yard, but inside. Slow, shuffling footsteps, like someone couldn't lift a foot properly. I thought it was my sister Odette. She was in high school at the time, but when I looked out, I saw her door was closed, and the footsteps continued for a while longer, stopping right outside my room. A few days later, my dad said at breakfast that he'd heard noises inside the walls, like something was scratching from within. He said it's smiling, that it was probably mice, but my mom didn't smile. The worst part was the thing with the rooftop door. That door is in front of some unfinished stairs that lead to the third floor that was never built, in an isolated part of the house that we only used to hang up clothes. One night we were all watching television when we heard the lock rattling, as if someone were trying to break in from the outside. We ran upstairs, but there was no one there, and I couldn't see them. The roof is very high compared to the neighboring houses, and there are several meters of distance between the roofs. It was impossible for someone to have broken in, to have jumped over. There was no way anyone could have been on the other side of the door. My dad tried to joke that this was what we got for buying such a cheap house, but no one laughed. Least of all me, because although I didn't know it at the time, this was just the beginning. During the week, my routine was almost always the same. My parents would pick me up from school and take me to my mom's work. I would stay there for a while until my dad came out, and then we would all go home together. Well, all except Odette. She was at school and would come home alone, straight to the home. So for at least a few hours a day, she was completely alone. And from the first week, every time we arrived, we'd hear someone running upstairs as soon as we opened the door. The sound was very clear. Hurried arms trying to hide coming from the roof or the unfinished third floor. They'd rush down the stairs and end up in her room. And then silence. My parents thought Odette was doing something she didn't want us to see, maybe spying on the next-door neighbor. A boy she'd found handsome since we arrived, who lived with his family and, according to my sister, wasn't bad-looking. And that, in my sister's words, meant she was smitten with him. But since they didn't see it as anything serious and she was very shy, they never bothered her about it. But one Friday, something different happened. We had stopped at the supermarket before arriving, so my parents stayed outside taking the bags out of the car, and I went ahead to open the door. I had barely put the key in when I heard footsteps again. Someone coming down from the roof to the second floor, running from above, but now stomping really hard. And then a door slammed. I peeked over the stairs, still from the ground floor, and saw her running past, but she was walking strangely. She was lifting her knees really high and stomping hard, as if she were exaggerating every step, almost cartoonish. "And now you, why are you running like a clown?" I asked her from below, almost laughing. He didn't answer. I only heard his door slam shut again. When my parents came in, I told them Odette was acting strange, but my mom looked at me like she didn't understand and said, "Your brother isn't here. He asked permission to have a sleepover with his friends at Carolina's house." I was quiet for a few seconds. Then I told them what I had seen, and my dad frowned without saying anything and started going upstairs. He had barely set foot on the second floor when we all heard him. Footsteps were running down the hallway upstairs, pounding the floorboards from one end to the other. They weren't footsteps trying to hide. They were heavy, angry. My dad stood still, staring into the darkness of the hallway. When he came back downstairs, he said there was nothing there, that he was still like he was dazzled by the bright white lights of the kitchen, but he did feel something. He said he felt someone rush past him, that he felt the wind when someone runs by. We were scared. We went upstairs together. We checked room by room up to the roof and the unfinished section, and we found nothing. Not an open door, not a forced entry, nothing. But we knew what we heard, what we felt. I knew what I saw. When I think about everything that happened, I think what scares me most isn't what I saw, but what my sister was going through without anyone noticing. A few weeks passed after what I told you before, and Odette still seemed normal. She went to high school, hung out with her friends, laughed at the table. But one day Carolina, her best friend since middle school, called my parents. We didn't know her very well, but she sounded worried. She told them that Odette had changed a lot since we moved there, that sometimes she told her strange things. At first she said there was a voice that spoke to her at night from her bed. Then she started hearing it almost all day, always from a dark place. Sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, the voice would tell her to go to a closet, to open the door a crack, and from inside it would tell her something she had to do. Of course, my parents didn't completely believe Carolina. They thought it was just teenage stuff, or maybe she was exaggerating. But Carolina insisted and said, "Please, just do something. Go check Odette's room when I'm not here. That's all I ask. Go check it. Check everything and you'll understand." That weekend, my sister went out, and my parents took the opportunity to go into her room. I stayed behind them, looking through the door, but then I went in too. Odette had her own bathroom. As soon as they came in and turned on the light, we fell silent. The entire bathroom was covered in melted wax. I'm not talking about a few drops. There were thick layers running down to the floor. There were spent candles everywhere and 3 lit candles in front of the mirror. On it, amidst the smoke and drops of wax, that there were splatters on the glass, strange drawings, symbols I can't quite describe now, as if my memory had erased them. When Dad came home, my parents confronted him. At first, he denied everything, but then he burst into tears. But finally, he couldn't hold it in. He said he listened to that voice so it wouldn't hurt us, and then crying, he begged them, "Please don't blow out the candles in front of the mirror." He said that if they go out, we'll all suffer the consequences, especially Camila. She needs the candles in front of the mirror so she can come and go. My parents, thinking it was a psychological or psychiatric crisis, decided to send her to my grandmother's house, where an uncle who is a psychiatrist lived. That way, she would be cared for, supervised, and away from that house that was doing so much damage. My family is very close, especially during these kinds of crises, so they welcomed her with open arms and told us not to worry, that she would be fine. That same day, after dropping her off, we came back and my parents blew out the candles. I remember clearly that I stayed behind, cleaning, scraping the wax off the candle while they went downstairs to take out the trash. That's when I heard something very strange, the sound of something coming out from under the bed behind me, very slowly, but with real weight. My whole body tingled. I wanted to run, to scream, but I just froze. I forced myself to turn toward the door to get out and saw that the room was empty. That gave me the courage to take a step outside and run. But when I got to the hallway, standing a few feet away, there was something terrifying. There was something that looked like a very tall, thin man wearing a faded old suit. He had a wig on badly, and his face was too white, like he was wearing a lot of makeup. His lips were painted red, but everything around them was also smeared with the same color, as if he had smeared paint or blood all over his mouth. The worst part was his eyes, because it looked like he didn't have eyelids. He stared at me, as if surprised to see me there, and suddenly he ran toward the stairs that led to the roof. His steps were quick, desperate, but his knees were very high. And I don't remember anything else, only that I woke up in the living room with my mom sitting next to me and my dad fanning me with a folder. I had fainted. When I told them what I saw, my mom turned to my dad and said, "See? I told you it felt like it was here, that it wasn't my imagination." It turns out she had seen it too, although she never said anything to my sister or me, only to my dad, who hadn't quite believed her. I feel like she needed the candles to come and go. When we blew them out, she stayed on this side. And my parents complained a lot for months to the real estate agency, but they couldn't do anything. What on earth could they do? They just assured us it had nothing to do with the previous owners. But oh well, I guess there's no guarantee against ghosts. In the end, we just went with that. We bought the house because, I repeat, it was a fantastic deal at that price. But we moved out. It's been rented out ever since, but they've never had a tenant renew their lease. Everyone leaves as soon as they can, even though my parents offer a very reasonable price, below what other houses in the area are going for, even though they're smaller. The last thing Dad told me, and this was my recent experience with that house, left me with a strange feeling. One day, talking about inheritances and such, he told me, "The day my parents pass away, that house is for you." I don't plan on going back there. Hello, my name is Javier, and I'm writing to you from León, Guanajuato. This happened to me a few years ago when I moved with my wife and 8-year-old son to a house in the historic center. The owner explained that it was an old building, over 100 years old, but that it had been recently remodeled. It was on a street, a few steps from the corner. The rent was higher than what we had budgeted, but it had always been my dream to live there in that area. And although the house had old-fashioned details like wooden floors, high ceilings, and iron windows, the three of us loved it. The room that was going to be my son's was at the back, next to a small interior courtyard. Upon entering, the first thing I noticed was that the walls would need a thorough cleaning, as they were covered in pencil scribbles. They weren't children's scribbles or insults, they were short phrases. Almost there. "Don't open it, it's nighttime." I tried to clean them, but I couldn't. We thought then that it would be a matter of painting the wall, and that would be it. The first weekend, we painted the entire room with 2 coats of fresh paint. We slept peacefully the first night, but the next morning the phrases had reappeared in the same places, as if we had never painted. At first, we thought that perhaps the paint hadn't covered well, that the humidity and light were making the old marks show through. We decided to thoroughly reinforce the entire wall, smooth it out, and repaint it. This time it worked for a day. The next morning the phrases had returned, but they weren't the same. Now they were longer. "Tell him not to go out. Get him out of there. Don't leave him alone." What bothered me was realizing that they always spoke as if giving some kind of instruction, and it always seemed like they might be about my son. My wife asked me not to say anything to him so as not to scare him, influence him, or put ideas in his head, but he started making very strange comments. First, he said he dreamed about someone speaking to him from the wall in a low, slow voice, as if it were difficult to pronounce each word, as if he were running out of breath. One night, while I was helping him with his homework, I saw him staring intently at a spot on the wall. He wasn't distracted. He was listening. When I asked him what was wrong, he said, "She's asking if she can come in." I didn't dare ask who, and my son was too old for imaginary friends. You'll agree with me. The most terrifying morning was a Saturday. My wife was in the kitchen making coffee, and I went upstairs to wake the boy. When I opened the door, I saw him asleep, but on the wall, written in slightly larger letters, but bolded, as if it had been written over and over. I don't know if you'll believe me, not even my mother did, but I swear on my son's life that it said on the wall, "He's coming for him." I don't know how to explain it, but that phrase, of course, didn't feel like the others. Besides, it seemed more recent, darker, as if it had been written that very morning. And that day, that very day, we packed the essentials and went to my in-laws' house. We returned days later just to pick up what was missing. We didn't want to terminate the contract or try to get the deposit back. It was money down the drain. Recently, a friend who lives nearby told me that after several years of being empty, the house was finally rented. I wish luck to whoever lives there now. Hello everyone. My name is Teresa, and I live in Guadalajara. What I'm sharing with you happened a few years ago when we bought the house we still live in. It's not a huge place or anything like that. Rather, it's an old building with narrow hallways that suddenly end at a wall, doors that don't line up, and ceilings that change height from room to room for no clear reason. The owner told us it had undergone several renovations since the 1950s, which is why the floor plans didn't always match up. He laughed when he said it, as if downplaying it, but it left me with an uneasy feeling, like when you move a piece of furniture and notice that the floor below isn't the same size. Even so, we loved it. It's close to the downtown, the street is quiet and has large trees that provide shade all day. And something that captivated me from my first visit was the silence. As soon as you close the door, the street noise almost completely disappears. The room I was most excited about was upstairs. I wanted to turn it into a sewing studio because it gets so much light in the afternoon. It had a built-in bookcase made of very old wood with such a uniform layer of dust that it looked painted. One Saturday, after we'd moved in, my husband and I decided to remove it to paint that wall. As we peeled it off, I noticed a cooler air coming from behind it, as if we had opened a hidden window. Behind the bookcase was a built-in wardrobe that wasn't shown on the plans we'd been given. The door was swollen from damp and had a rusty bolt like the kind found on doors facing the street, used to secure the door from one side or the other, with marks indicating it had been forced at some point. A smell somewhere between sweet and sour wafted from inside, damp wood and old-fashioned perfume. That kind of lingering, musty scent that clings to the TV and won't go away. Opening it took us a while. When we finally managed it, the first shock was visual. Very old clothes, carefully folded, as if someone had put them away just the day before. Long, thick dresses, men's suits with waistcoats, a wide-brimmed hat, and 2 pairs of leather shoes worn at the toes. What was strange wasn't just the era, but that they were almost dust-free. I touched a sleeve with my fingertips and the scent of the perfume lingered on them, as if the fabric were still releasing it. We went through it piece by piece, more out of curiosity than anything else. At the back of the closet was a cardboard box in good condition without rust or water stains. Inside, a stack of instant photos, every single one, and I mean every single one, had been taken inside the house. In the living room, the dining room, the main staircase, the upstairs hallway, a corner of the kitchen I recognized from the crazy ones. The pictures showed people we, of course, didn't know. In many, the people were standing looking at the camera, but with expressions that suggested they didn't want to be there. In others, in most, they had their backs to the camera with one hand raised, always covering their faces. And in several, you could barely see a shoulder in a doorway, a hand gripping the railing, a blurry silhouette in the background. They seemed like strangers, visitors. That night, once the house was quiet, we spread all the photos out on the dining room table. We started arranging them by rooms. We noticed that there were repeated elements. The same armchair that no longer exists, a floor lamp, a painting of flowers that no one left when we moved into the house. And in more than half of the photos, in some corner, a very long shadow appeared, as if someone were standing outside the frame and the flash barely managed to capture them. Something else caught our attention. Some photos showed angles that no longer exist. For example, one of the living rooms showed a large window behind the sofa. In the current house, that wall is completely solid. In others, a staircase was visible, and behind the woman with her back to the camera, a lit hallway where now there is only a wall. Looking more closely, we noticed details that were initially overlooked. Tiny writing on the white margins of the photos that looked like short dates or initials. On one, for example, it said TD.710 and on another, D6 AM, as if someone had been recording the time of each photograph. On the back of one photo, written in blue ink, it simply said 26/12/26. The photographs seemed to tell the story of the house's renovations, its history, like a record of each new scar. We put them back in the box to protect them and placed it on top of the cabinet, intending to move it later. Since that space would be my studio, there were many of those containers where I keep my materials. We locked the cabinet for added security. My husband moved a heavy piece of furniture in front of the door. Yes, we both thought about that. Security. Security from what? We didn't really know, but subconsciously we knew we wanted the door to be well secured, so it couldn't be opened from the inside, just in case. I remember him saying, "I had the smell in my nose all night. A sweet yet sour smell clinging to my fingers. The next day, while I was testing my machine on the desk in the study, I felt the room was a little cooler than the rest of the house. It's not something you can measure with a thermometer, but you know your own house." I approached the wardrobe, and without touching it, noticed that the satin ribbon I'd placed on the metal plate was moving very slightly, like when a draft hits you, but there were no open windows. The following week, one afternoon, I went upstairs with coffee to work on some stitches for something I was knitting. I always have Juan Gabriel playing softly on my phone. Nothing unusual. I was doing that when I heard a click, short, sharp, like a camera click, as if someone had just taken a picture. I stopped. I thought it was my phone, but it was on airplane mode. I waited, and it didn't happen again. I didn't tell my husband so I wouldn't seem like I was overreacting. That same night after dinner, I got curious and looked at the photos again. I took them out of the container and stood by the dining room table looking at them. I counted one more, and even without really looking at them, I was terrified, thinking the worst, imagining a new photo that might appear. Sure enough, there was a photo I hadn't noticed before, but luckily I wasn't in it. If I had been, I would have died of fright right then and there. As the days went by, I started noticing small things, tiny details. The temperature in the room changed unrelated to the weather outside. Sometimes in the mid-afternoon, when the sun hit the window, the air in the studio was cool, almost as if a fan were blasting and it felt icy cold. Other times, at dusk, it felt oppressively hot, and that sweet smell from the wardrobe wafted out as if the wood itself were sweating that perfume. There was one time when, upon entering, I felt the floor vibrate very slightly, a tiny tremor. I thought it was a heavy truck passing by, but there was no sound from the street. I glanced at the nailed-down wardrobe, and I could swear the top hinge was slightly detached, just enough to show a darker line along the edge, as if the wood had given way. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't dare, really. One Sunday, my in-laws came over for lunch while I was bringing dishes upstairs to the studio. I use that table for chopping, and sometimes I leave things there when the kitchen gets crowded. My mother-in-law stood by the bedroom door. "Your study is lovely, dear," she said. "It just has a strange smell, doesn't it? Like an old woman's wardrobe." I replied that we were airing it out, that it would go away. She went over to the closet, and when she was about to touch it, I clearly heard her say, "Oh, there's someone in there." I asked her what she had said, and my mother-in-law just walked backward. "Nothing, dear, just old wives' tales." I told her that if she wanted, I could show it to, and she said no. Without hesitation, and using the first excuse he could think of, he left me alone there in my knitting studio. As soon as they left, I lowered the heavy piece of furniture and approached. I pressed my ear to the tabletop and heard nothing. I knocked on the door with my knuckles. It was a light knock, more out of nervousness than anything else. I felt the sound return, muffled, as if there were a great deal of space behind it, as if it were an echo, as if it were the door leading to a deep hallway. We resecured the nails, and my husband added 2 more. That night, while we were watching a movie, we heard that very clear click again from upstairs. We looked at each other, paused the movie, went upstairs together, and turned on the light. Nothing was out of place. The closet door was still nailed shut, the cabinet still glued in place. We checked the whole house, windows closed, lock on the front door in place. Everything was fine, but the sound had been very clear, and now my husband could verify it. It had been the click of a camera shutter. A few days later, without having touched the box of photographs at all, I found another one somewhere in the house, alone, under a step of the stairs. It was very blurry, but it looked almost abstractly like our living room, the one we had brought with our blue sofa, not the old one from the other photos. The photo was a little blurry, as if someone had taken it in a hurry while running. I put it on the table and took a deep breath to calm myself. When my husband arrived, I showed him the photo without saying a word. He looked at it for a long time. "Don't worry. This one probably belongs to someone else. You probably hadn't seen it. Do you remember the seller telling us that many people had lived here? This house is full of memories, of all those families that the house will gradually reveal to us. Don't worry." That was his only response. That was all he said. I don't know if it convinced him in any way, but it definitely didn't reassure me. We put it away with the other photos in the same box. That night, before going to sleep, I asked him if we could nail the door shut again to make it more secure. And yes, it was already nailed, but we nailed it again lower down. We also put a metal L bracket in the corner, nothing drastic, just to reinforce the door. A few calm weeks passed. L left fabric on the study table at night. I'd rather keep it in a drawer. I also didn't want to leave mirrors facing the closet door. I closed the curtains at dusk. They're little habits you pick up without realizing it. The day something big happened again was during the week, at night. We were watching the news when upstairs there was a dull thud, louder than usual. We ran upstairs. The studio light was off. When we turned it on, we saw the closet door wide open, not broken, not ripped off, just open. The nails were still in the wood, but around it looked as if it had swollen and then given way. The piece of furniture we had left in front of it was slightly shifted, just a few centimeters, enough to allow the door to open. On the floor, with no place to throw things, where the old clothes and photographs were spread out as if they'd been thrown in. My husband quickly gathered the photos with his hands without saying a word and put them back in the box. He put the clothes away too, and we closed the closet again, this time screwing in 2 cross-shaped brackets. We lowered the cabinet and pushed it against the door with all its weight. We didn't call anyone. Who do you call to tell them that a closet that wasn't on the plans opens by itself, that it holds photographs of the house, and that it keeps taking more? The next day was a normal day, sort of. Work, errands, simple lunch. I went upstairs in the afternoon intending to collect my things from the studio. The room smelled less of perfume and more of humidity, like when you open a box that's been stored away for a long time. I touched the table, ran my hand over the machine, and put away the yarn. Before leaving, without thinking, I rested my fingers on the closet door. It was cold, like a window in winter. I stood there for a moment, and all I heard was the normal noise of the house, the water heater, a car in the distance, my footsteps coming back up the stairs. We haven't moved that closet since. The studio is still my knitting studio, but at certain times I prefer to close it. Sometimes, very rarely, I go upstairs for something and I get that brief click, as if someone were testing a camera behind the woodwork. I don't chase after it. I don't want to investigate. I go back downstairs, turn on the living room light, and do something else. The photos are still stored in the same container, but not in that room anymore. We've already moved them down to the basement. They have a label that says various, so no one gets curious and wants to look through them. And yes, you're probably wondering why we didn't just throw everything away, and I wouldn't know what to say. I suppose you learn to live with certain things in a house, just like you live with noises or doors that get stuck. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We recently had dinner with some friends, and they started telling us paranormal stories. Apparently, a lot of strange things happen in their house. I promise you that, without wanting to leave them out, I told them what happened to us, about the photos. When I finished the story, I got nervous and got up to go to the bathroom. And when I returned, I heard my husband telling them that the time he collected the photos, when that door was forced open, he had seen one more photograph, one he hid from me, one where I was knitting with my back to the camera, which he quickly concealed without me noticing. I pretended not to have heard. I made noise so they would know I was approaching. I didn't want to break that lie, but already in on the way home, I asked him why he had said that. He got very nervous and started sweating. Finally, after much prodding, he told me he had only made it up to give the story a better ending, and I hope I can come to believe him. But I don't know. I just don't know. It doesn't sound like something he would do.